In this short video, I'm going to answer Chapter 13, numbers 11 and 12, and both of these start off with a reference to figure 13.1. So I'm just going to start off by drawing figure 13.1, and then I'll use it to address the questions. Figure 13.1 is the one that looks like this. It's our supply and demand framework in which we have an externality. There's the demand for this good, whatever it is. And there's the free market supply curve, which represents the marginal cost of the sum of the marginal cost of each of the producers to produce this good, and that's the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. But then, because there's an externality, what that means is that there's some social cost curve somewhere vertically above the supply curve, but behind it in terms of quantity back here, and it looks like this. And what that tells us is that the optimal quantity is actually here, and it is lower than the free market quantity, because in the free market all costs aren't being compensated for in the production of the good. And it also tells us that the optimal price is actually higher than the free market price. It should cost more. So that's the model. Now let's see what we're asked about it with it re-explained so quickly like that. Take a look at the figure. Why does including externalities cause the supply curve S2 to lie above supply curve S1 that has been drawn excluding externalities? So this is using the terms that were just described in that question. This is S2, S2, and this is S1. S2 and S1. Why is S2 higher? Well, it includes all of the costs, not just the private costs. Here's a textbook answer for you. The answer hinges on the fact that the supply curves reflect the marginal costs of the firms that produce goods and services. The supply curve S2 includes additional costs associated with externalities that are not taken into account to supply curve S1. Because the marginal costs involved in constructing S2 are higher than those of S1, the former supply curve must lie above and to the left, vertically above. To the left might be safer to think about. Above and to the left of the latter supply curve. So it includes all costs, like we said really when we drew it and when we described it. Now let's try number 12. Consider figure 13.1. What is the specific reason that accounting for externalities and thereby shifting the market supply curve causes the equilibrium quantity of goods X to decline from Q1 to Q2? So this is Q1 and this is Q2. Why does the quantity fall when these costs are included? Well, when the costs are included, the firms would be producing less of it because input prices are a determinant of supply. And what we're saying here is that the firms are going to be billed for these costs that they otherwise weren't paying. And so that's like an increase in input prices. So that decreases supply, gets us back to the social cost curve. Billed maybe in taxes, various ways that we've discussed with the tragedy of the commons. That gets us back here because of the higher cost to the firms. But what causes the quantity to actually fall? Well, if the good's more scarce, all else held constant, who's going to buy it? Those consumers willing and able to pay more. So all that's left is this new Q2. With the higher costs factored in, the price rises, and those consumers, because of the law of demand, will be fewer and farther between who are willing to pay for that amount to be produced. Here's the textbook answer to make sure I covered it my way there. After the supply curve shifts upward and to the left, there is an excess quantity demanded of good X at the initial per unit price. If the price were to stay here, demand would exceed supply. Okay, that's a good way to look at it. As a consequence, consumers bid up the price of the item to P2. This price increase generates an upward movement along the demand curve and causes the equilibrium quantity of good X to decline from Q1 to Q2. Said the same thing. I actually think that adds a little confusion, but if the price weren't to rise, the supply would be here, the quantity supply would be here, the quantity demanded would be there still. We would have excess demand. Well, it's a free market. It has government in the sense that we're being forced to the social cost curve, but it's not. There's no price ceiling here, so the price would rise, and only those who would be willing and able to pay the higher price would get it, and that's why we would have lesser quantity. So I think I've now said it 3 ways. So hopefully it's coming through in one of those 3 ways.